On this day, the 14th of December, in 1780, the subject of our presentation, Mr. Ignatius Sancho, died in London, aged 51 and suffering from gout. With his wife of some 21 years, he had 7 children, 5 believed to be then still living. His grocery business in Mayfair was still thriving, and on account of his being a landowner, he had been granted a vote in the recent elections. His obituary was shortly to appear in the Gentleman's Magazine. In addition, some 2 years later, a collection of his voluminous correspondence with many notable literary figures, including Lawrence Sterne, was to be published to an admiring list of some 1,200 subscribers. All this, under any circumstances of origin, would have been sufficient for him to be acclaimed as the very model of an English gentleman. The fact that he was actually born a slave of African parentage only adds to our admiration. What is more, his cultural endeavours in the field of dance and music, even though not of the magnitude of a Handel or Arne, can only make us wonder in astonishment at his industry and breadth of intellect. Such a range of achievements marks Sancho as perhaps the epitome of an 18th century English gentleman, and it is for this, one might argue, rather than for his not inconsiderable efforts towards abolishing the slave trade, that we are honouring him this day, the 240th anniversary of his passing. To overcome adversity in such a fashion and to create an enduring cultural legacy is well worth celebration. In the following programme, you will see performances of Sancho's dancers, hear his music and discussions with Sally Pecci, the author of a recently published book about Ignatius Sancho and his dance collections. Discussions follow also with Merrill Thompson from the Green Ginger Band, who have recently recorded a CD of Sancho's music, and with Paul Cooper, a member of Hampshire Regency Dancers and an early dance circle trustee, who contributed to Sally's research and participated in the performance of Sancho's dancers at the Palace House, Beaulieu, in 2019. Prior to this, let's just hear Paul Cooper with a brief overview of what we know about Sancho's life and his dance and music heritage.
Hello, I'm Paul Cooper, and I'm here today to talk about the life and the dances of Ignatius Sancho. And we have here on the top left a famous portrait of Sancho painted by Gainsborough, we believe, in 1768. Now, I'll just start by telling you a bit about the type of dancers that Sancho includes in his collections. So we have the minuet dance. That's a courtly couple dance. It's a dance of skill and elegance and good breeding. We have the cotillion, also referred to as the French country dance. That's a choreographed dance, typically danced by 8 people, 4 couples in the shape of a square. And we have the English country dance in what's known as a long way set, where a line of couples are dancing with each other, as many as are willing to dance. And those are the 3 main dance forms that we will find in the Sancho collections. And speaking of those collections, there are 4 of them, as far as we know. The first there, circa 1767, minuets, cotillions, and country dancers. The second, circa 1770, is minuets, etc. And the third, 1776, cotillions, etc. And finally, the 12 country dancers for the year 1779. And there was also, of course, a collection of new songs that was published maybe around about 1769. And the top 3, you might be able to see on the covers, they are composed by an African, what we're told, whereas the bottom 2 actually have Sancho's name on the cover. He's put his name to it. And the top 3, they are inscribed to Henry Duke of Buccleuch, to John Lord Montague of Boughton, and also to Mrs. James Brudnell, who are all members of the extended Montague family. We'll talk about them shortly. The bottom 2 are dedicated to the Princess Royal, the monarch's oldest daughter, and Miss North, the Prime Minister's oldest daughter. An interesting collection of dedications there. Now, the detail of Sancho's life that's probably best known is that, of course, he was a letter writer. And recently, the British Library have digitised a collection of his surviving letters, We see one example here on the left in Sancho's own handwriting. And I quite like this one. It's dated April Day 1779. At the very bottom you might be able to read where he writes, "I am, sir, an African, with 2 F's, if you please." I like that. And then on the right we have one of his letters to Lawrence Sterne, the novelist. And this is a rare example of a letter that was actually published in his lifetime. We have it here from the Chester Chronicle, but it appeared in a number of newspapers. And it's an interesting letter because it's one of the few where he shares some autobiographical details. So feel free to press pause and to read it. But yeah, he's encouraging Sterne to take up the cause of slavery and to write about slavery. So Sancho, of course, died in 1780. There's a very brief obituary there in the Kentish Gazette. Shortly after his death, a proposal was circulated to print his letters by subscription. And by 1782, we're told that a good 1,200 people had come forward to do that, and they were in fact published. And so we have here the first edition of the letters of the late Ignatius Sancho, an African, in 2 volumes. The editor was Miss Crewe, who we understand some of the letters were written to. She wrote a little foreword there where she explains that Sancho had never intended his letters for publication. She'd had to go out and actually collect them and edit them. And of course, along with the letters was included a brief biography written by Joseph Jekyll. And it's from that biography that a lot of the details of Sancho's life are known, particularly his early life. So Jekyll tells us that Sancho was born on a slave ship on the way to Cartagena. His parents died. He was brought back to England, perhaps around the age of 2. He was owned by 3 sisters in Greenwich, and by some lucky chance was observed there by the Duke of Montague, who evidently saw some intelligence, something in Sancho, encouraged him to read. When a little later in life Sancho ran away from the sisters, it was to the Montague household that he fled. And by that date, the Duke had died, but his wife took Sancho on as her butler. And when she in turn passed away, Sancho left with some money. He was left a legacy. So the story continues from there, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. But those early details of Sancho's life are a little bit difficult to verify. All we have is this biography, and there are some problematic statements in there. So yes, we might come back to that. Anyway, we do know that in 1758 that Sancho married Anne Osborne. They had 6 children together, and after Sancho's death, the proceeds from that the first edition of the collection of letters did go to the family, and we're told that Mrs. Sancho made £500. So that's a significant income. Clearly, the letters were popular. Here we have the Montague family. In the top left, we have John Montague, the second Duke. He had a reputation of being a social experimenter, and he was Sancho's initial benefactor. So we're told that it was to Montague that Sancho fled when he ran away from the sisters. Now, the Duke had died in 1749, but his wife, the Duchess, took Sancho on. When she died, Sancho was given some money. Jekyll tells us that he went off and spent his time with actors, hanging around theatres and gambling and doing all that kind of stuff, presumably living the high life. But he wanted to settle down in 1758, and he reapplied to work for the family again. Now things get a bit complicated because the Montague title actually passes down through the male line, and the title actually died out in 1749 when the second Duke died. But their daughter, Mary, she'd married George Brudnell, Lord Cardigan, in 1730. And in 1766, Parliament decided to bring back the Dukedom of Montague, and they gave it to George Brudnell, who changed his name to Montague at that time. So he becomes the new first Duke of Montague, albeit of the second founding. And amongst other responsibilities, he was Constable of Windsor Castle. And so when Sancho is rehired in 58, he works for George, and we even know that Sancho had a room allocated for his use in Windsor Castle in 1769. So he presumably had privileged access to the aristocracy, perhaps even to royalty. Now, the first Duke has two children, John and Elizabeth. Elizabeth marries Henry Scott, the third Duke of Buccleuch, in 1767, and this is relevant because Sancho's three earlier works are dedicated to these people, to Henry, Duke of Buccleuch, to John, Lord Montague of Boughton, and also to Mrs. James Brudnell, George's sister-in-law. So just briefly, the Buccleuchs, they lived at Dalkeith Palace in Scotland. We know that Sancho visited at least once. He also wrote a tune named Dalkeith Palace. And the Buccleuchs, of course, they turn up quite a lot in Scottish dance references. So I find that an interesting little aside. But returning back to the Sancho story, Sancho left service with the Montagues for a second time in 1773. This time, again, with money, but he bought a shop. He bought a grocery shop in Westminster, just around the corner from Berkeley Square at 19 Charles Street. And we can actually see some of his trade cards there from the 1770s. Now, as a property owner, he had the right to vote. And we can see here that he did, in fact, vote in the 1774 elections. He voted for Earl Percy and Lord Thomas Clinton, along, it would appear, with most other people. But it is believed that he was probably the first black man to vote in a British election. Anyway, let's return back to the dancers. So the first of those collections, circa 1767, Minuets, Cotillions and Country Dancers, it's a mixture of both English and French country dancers. The French country dancers are really quite basic, they're very simple dancers. But what I find really interesting is the suggested publication date of 1767, because that was pretty much the first year that cotillions were published in London by anybody. So if Sancho was publishing them at that date, then he was very much at the forefront of that movement. He must have had privileged access to elite ballrooms. But I do kind of wonder if maybe this collection is actually just a little bit later. It may perhaps date to the early 1770s. Another little observation here, of course, Sancho claims to have been the composer of the dances. Now, did he also arrange the figures? It's not certain. He may very well have done so, but he very definitely created the music for these collections. Then moving on to the Minuets collection, circa 1770. We know that Elizabeth, of course, was an accomplished minuet dancer. It's a nice little reference to her there, opening a ball in 1771 with minuets. The collection is mostly made up of minuet tunes. One of them, well, several of them, in fact, have a horn accompaniment, which is a little bit unusual. But there's also 4 country dances in there. Those country dances do not have any figures attached to them. And again, I kind of wonder why that would be. It does say on the cover that this is the second book, but I do wonder if it's the second book and that the songs were the first book, and that the circa 1767 collection was perhaps just a little bit later. And Sancho started including figures with that collection. It's just a thought. Anyway, moving forwards, we have the 1776 collection. We know the date of that because we have an advertisement for it. It's a very accomplished collection, cotillions and country dancers. Some of the names are meaningful. For example, several are named after characters from Sterne's novels. Some places that Sancho will have visited. One of them you can see there is called the Runaway, the last in the collection. We do sort of wonder if that's something that Sancho has named almost for himself, perhaps. And this collection is dedicated to the Princess Royal, the 10-year-old princess, just a child. But this is presumably the work that Sancho's biographer, that Jekyll, refers to as his theory of music, which is a grandiose title for the collection. And then the final collection, of course, with the 12 country dances of 1779. Nice collection. Some of the dances are really, really quite special. These are some that we do enjoy dancing. You can see a little picture there of the Hampshire Regency dancers dancing one of them back in 2011. I like these dances. Anyway, I thought I would leave you with an excerpt from one of Sancho's letters written in 1777 to Mrs. C, and he'd evidently included one of his tunes in with that letter, and he writes that the little dance, which I like because I made it, I humbly beg you will make Jack play, and amongst you contrive a figure. I like that. Just imagine that Sancho has written you a dance, he sent you the music, and he would like you to get a family member to play it, and just put some figures to it, whatever you like. That's awesome. Anyway, I will leave you with just a slide here referencing two separate collections of dancers that you can buy through the EDC. They both include facsimile representations of the respective Sancho collections. The first by Valerie Webster investigates the 1779 collection, the second by Sani Pecci, or the Cotillion etc. collection from 1776. And you can go to the website and you can buy them there.
Thank you very much, Paul, for this short overview about Ignatius Sancho's life and his dance and music collections, which we are celebrating today. The next part of this program will be the discussion with Paul. I don't think Paul needs any further introduction, but I would like to congratulate him with publishing his 47th paper recently. Our other guest is Sally Pecci, a dancer, member of Hampshire Regency Dancers, dance historian, and a caller, an artist, and an author of Dances for a Princess, dedicated to Sancho's 1776 collection of dance and music. Last but not least, Meryl Thompson from Green Ginger Band, who has researched, recorded, and played music for numerous historical and Scottish dance events for over 35 years. Meryl plays fiddle in the band and interested in recreating music for early dance, as well as in the relationship between music and dance at the time. She's not a stranger to the dance floor either. And this fruitful collaboration between all of you resulted in a book, in a CD, and in a lively performance at the Palace House Beaulieu in 2019, the glimpses of which we will see later. And we will start with one of the cotillions, or French country dances, which you performed, called Tant Pis. Sally, does the name mean something?
Tant pis means never mind in French, and it seems to have been part of normal conversation during the Regency period. Sancho uses it in a letter to a Mr. S, where he writes of his horror that Mr. S had let his father read his previous letter, saying, "My cramp epistle fell into the hands of thy good and reverend father. Tant pis, why he must think me blacker than I am." Sorting out the interpretation of the last 16 bars of this dance was the most difficult part to do. Even though the instructions sound easy enough, couples moving around the square until they return to their original places, performing it gracefully needs precision and no hesitation.
question about music for the cotillions. Cotillions came from France. Would you say Sancho composed music in French style for his cotillions and for this one in particular?
In this collection, Sancho has used the format of French-style cotillions for his own dances and even given them French names, whereas his country dances have English names. Overall, although the cotillions in this collection have French titles, the music is not specifically French in style. None of his cotillions start musically on the half bar, usually called the gavotte style, which was very common in French cotillions. An example of this is La Baudry by Monsieur Baudry from 1762, which is in real time and has a half bar to begin. This is what it sounds like. Listen for the two notes, which are the upbeat into the first bar. This gavotte style appeared both in jig and in real time, and although this was very well known to both French and English dancers of the period, this half-bar start can pose quite a problem for dancers nowadays who aren't used to hearing gavotte-style tunes for dancing. Some tunes would work either with the emphasis on the half-bar or alternatively with the emphasis on the first beat of the bar. Other tunes only feel right one way or the other. Sancho's cotillion tunes, including Tant Pis, feel definitely that the emphasis should be on the first beat of the bar, which matches how they're written down. The first dance step would be taken on the first note of this music. Interestingly, this is the only cotillion in the collection which has a dotted rhythm, like in an English hornpipe, and this is not something I've seen in many other cotillions of the period. If they do, they tend to stay in the same rhythm and not change. However, as you probably noticed from the video, this cotillion changes rhythm halfway through the figure into jig time. It provides a challenge to the musician to change from the dotted rhythm to jig, and particularly back to dotted rhythm while keeping the flow and pace constant. I'll play a short section from our recording where you can hear the dotted real rhythm flowing into the jig music.
Let's see one of Sancho's English country dances from the performance for comparison. The Monk. Did Sancho refer to any known character, Sally?
It's not really clear why Sancho decided to call this dance the Monk. During the 18th century, monks in literature ceased to be purely benevolent and well-meaning. Gradually, they became more varied and colourful characters. By the end of the century, a famous book by Matthew Lewis, called The Monk, tells of a monk at the centre of an erotic story about obsession, power, greed, pride, and lust.
interesting detail in changing the orientation of the set in this dance. Then first gentleman dances with third gentleman. Was it easy to reconstruct and perform?
Actually, it was fun to reconstruct, because when you ask the first lady to turn the third man, the next move is usually symmetrical, so the first man would dance with the third lady. In Sancho's instructions, however, the third lady does not dance at all, and the third man instead dances again, but this time with the first man. This could be exactly what Sancho meant, or a printing error. In the end, I decided to leave it as written and enjoy the asymmetry that makes this different and fun to dance. Reconstructing the next part of the dance was also interesting. The working couple are currently in the middle of either the second couple, that's where the lady is, or the third couple, which is where the man is, and they're across the set. They need to get into second couple's position on their own side. Now, the quickest and easiest way to do this would be to cross over in the middle, a move we call the Petronella. But a book written in 1764, around the time Sancho was creating his dances, called Country Dancing Made Plain and Easy, suggests a different move called to foot abreast, where, to quote the book, the man casts up on his own side and the woman casts off on her own side, each falling in proper and foot as before. This takes the working couple around the outside, making a very different shape. This is more unusual in modern times, but it seemed right to follow this in the reconstruction.
Paul, was it common for men to dance with each other in the Regency period, and how did you find this move while you performed?
Oh, the sequence is certainly interesting. Yeah, as Sally explained, it's quite uncommon. But yeah, it's jolly good fun to dance. It required a little bit of effort not to collide with the other dancers, so it took a little bit of experimentation. But yeah, in terms of same-gender couples, that was certainly unusual, but not forbidden by any means. In certainly in the early 19th century, there were several etiquette guides which referred to the rules for how that kind of thing would happen. So yeah, certainly not unheard of.
For your performance, you also choose another country dance, Runaway. Do you think it relates to the events of Sancho's own life?
This dance reflects that period and probably connects well with Sancho's own life experience. Between 1700 and 1780, there were more than 800 newspaper adverts asking for information about slaves who had run away. These adverts often offered a financial reward, usually 2 guineas, for useful information, but also reminded readers that it was illegal to hide a slave who had escaped and that they could be prosecuted. Unsurprisingly, Sancho was a strong abolitionist. He once wrote that he wished the whole race of Adam could mix with all countries, colours and faiths and have the same opportunities. Sancho would likely have approved of the culture of the navy at this time, as the same opportunities were offered to anyone who showed ability and motivation to learn. This meant that there were many sailors of African descent. For example, a slave of the 18th century poet and playwright Dr. Samuel Johnson, called Francis Barber, ran away to join the navy in 1758. Sancho was a domestic slave to 3 spinster sisters, and they clearly felt that Sancho should think himself lucky for having such a position. They would use the threat of sending him back to work as a slave on the sugar plantation of the Americas to keep him in line. The sisters also refused to support the idea of Sancho having an education. This was even when John, the second Duke of Montagu, who was impressed by Sancho in a chance meeting, strongly urged them to. It is reported that the Duke used to lend books to Sancho, bring him home to read to the Duchess, and encourage him to learn. It was probably these tastes of freedom, in contrast to the indignation he felt in servitude, which ultimately drove him to run away from the 3 sisters and escape to the Duke's house. Unfortunately for Sancho, the Duke had recently died, and the Duchess was initially reluctant to take him in. Sancho was so distraught he appears to have considered suicide, but thankfully the Duchess finally agreed to offer him protection.
Based on Sancho's biography and letters, we know he was working for the powerful aristocratic families of the time and the royal household, and was informed about politics, affairs, and manners of the elites. So the next cotillion, Le Bon Ton, is probably a good example of this, isn't it?
Le Bon Ton, meaning good manners or fashionable, could be referring to the ton. This was the name given to the hedonistic society that grew up among the upper echelons of London's elite at this time. Georgiana Cavendish, the then Duchess of Devonshire, was a young extrovert, a trendsetter in fashion and style, and what she did, the ton followed. In a letter on fashion that Sancho writes to the general advertiser, he mocks the ton for losing 2 or 3 hours a day in powdering and styling their hair. In another letter, he jokes that the best cure for his friend's headaches would be if he cut off his weighty hair. But of course, that would be against the fashionable views of the time.
Sancho, we can hear a change in tempo for this dance. Was it typical for cotillions of the time? And what rhythms are these?
The bon ton is a very unusual cotillion musically because of the way the music changed rhythm part way through the figure. Cotillions are dances which usually consist of the change and the figure. The figure usually stays the same for each turn of the dance while the change varies. There were sometimes more than 10 changes danced in each cotillion. So the structure of the dance is one change followed by the figure, then another change followed by the figure, and so on. Usually the music stays the same rhythm throughout. Many cotillions created musical interest by keeping to the same time signature, but including a section in a minor key during part of the figure, a fashion which continued in quadrille music later on. However, it's not unusual to have different music for the change and the figure. A cotillion like, for example, La Boulangère, has real and jig rhythms, but the whole change is in real time and the whole figure is in jig time. So there is a definite break in feel to show when to go back to the change. Some cotillions from other collections do change rhythms during the figure, like Sancho's Bon Ton and Tant Pis, as I mentioned earlier. La Ronde de Fischer, one of Gellini's cotillions from around 1779, has the change and 16 bars of the figure in real time, but then changes to minuet for the last 24 bars of the figure. It means that the music is going from a faster rhythm to a slower one, which seems to have been more common. Scottish musicians such as Neil Gow arranged tunes as medleys, suggesting one could move from strathspey to real time, i.e. going from a slower rhythm to a faster one. Tant Pis similarly moves from a slower field dotted hornpipe to faster jig time. In Le Bon Ton, the music changes halfway through the figure from real to jig time, which are both fast rhythms, and this is particularly unusual. When we first looked at Le Bon Ton, we expected the real music was to be used only for the change and the jig music was only for the figure. But on matching the dance instructions to the music, we found the change in rhythm fell halfway through the figure section. How music was written down in published music collections was not precise. We've often seen mistakes, erroneous repeats, and even missing bars. There's also the question of whether the real music is a single reel or a double reel, which I'll explain in a moment. Did Sancho actually mean for the figure to be played half in real time and half in jig time, which is what it appeared from the written music? Was this a deliberate decision? We tried different versions with the dancers and found that changing from reel to jig at that point in the figure elevated the dance and felt right to the dancers. Another point about the music for Le Bon Ton is that for us, the real music, as written as a single reel in 2/4 time, felt more like a march than a dance, since it's a relatively simple tune. The music was heading into lively jig rhythm later in the dance, but then had to return to this marchy music for the change on the next time through. We didn't want the music to feel as if the return to the change was dull. We made the decision, therefore, to play the real music as a double reel to give more interest musically, and this also fitted in with the other real-time dances in the collection and the Scottish influence in Sancho's music. A double reel means you fit twice as many notes into the same time. The dance steps are the same speed, but the music feels twice as fast. I'll play two versions of the music for the change. Both are at the same dancing tempo or pace, but the first is a single reel, as written in Sancho's manuscript, and the second is a double reel, which is what we recorded. In the first example, you will hear just the A strain twice through. In the second example, the double reel, you'll hear the A strain twice and the B strain twice. Both versions are the right length for the change section of the dance. Now for the double time version. Both music and dance are open to interpretation, but what we came up with makes for an interesting dance, we feel, both visually and musically. And most importantly, is enjoyable to dance for the dancers.
To elaborate about Sancho's music following this interesting example in Le Bon Ton, were there any special features of Ignatius Sancho's music? You mentioned you could get some feelings for his real-time dances.
Yes, we certainly felt when hearing and playing Sancho's music that there was an element of Scottish feel to his compositions, especially to those in real time. Having played for Scottish country dancing for many years and aware of the historical tradition of Scottish fiddle music, it seemed to us that Sancho had incorporated this feel into the reels of his country dance music in particular, Corporal Trim, Dalkeith Palace and The Monk being good examples of this. A lot of the country dances in this collection have short 4-bar phrases repeated, which is common in Scottish folk music. Although some of the tunes sound quite basic, they might well have been embellished with flowery ornamentation if played on a harpsichord, as this is necessary since you can't sustain notes. Of course, if they were being played for listening purposes, they could be played slower and with more ornamentation, but would have needed to be simplified if being played faster for dancing.
You have played, danced, and thought about Sancho dances and music. Do you have your favorites?
Well, of the dances we've just seen, I would choose the Runaway. It's perhaps one that Sancho may have named for himself, and it's kind of interesting. Sancho explains some of the figures in great long detail, particularly the poussette, and I think that's kind of interesting. It's kind of representative of country dancing of the 1770s in general, so I like that one.
My favourite to dance is Le Bon Temps. Just as you're being asked to dance the Lady's Chain, which is a lovely flowing movement, the music changes from a reel to a jig and you can really embrace this change of tempo. So it's great fun. One move that Sancho seems to favour in the country dances of this collection is where the first couple cross, cast below the second couple and do a 2-hand turn. Quite interesting to have that in many of the dances in this particular collection, but not necessarily in some of his other collections.
Can I give a call out for another of the dances in this collection, the Montem? This has syncopated rhythm in the music, and for us was one of the best pieces to play. So much so we recorded it as 12 times through the dance. The music is compelling, the dance is busy, and the rights and lefts in 4 bars mean you have to move to get round, which adds to the excitement.
How detailed were Sancho's directions for dances? Were they straightforward to reconstruct and to follow? Were there any ambiguities or difficulties?
Generally speaking, in this collection, the dance moves fitted well with the music and the strain markers are generally well placed. However, in this collection, there is a dance called Fornham Johnny, and here the strain markers are confusing. They ask the gentleman to perform a move in 8 bars, which is quite normal, even if rather a lot of music to do this particular move. But they ask the ladies to perform the same move and another move which needs 8 bars, all in 8 bars. This could just be a printing error. So we decided that the same move by the men and ladies should take only 4 bars each, which leaves 8 bars to do the 4 changes of a square hay. Sometimes the instructions were very detailed. In Le Bon Temps, there is a very detailed description of what we would now call the lady's chain. The direction that circles and turns need to go in are rarely given. The use of French terms was interesting. When Allemande was used, it could mean the 1762 de la Crusade description of 2 entwined dancers who will turn together, or it could be the 1768 Longman description, which describes the gentleman turning his partner under in a pirouette fashion. Many moves like change sides or lead out sides, for example, have several different interpretations, and so I have tried to use all the different ones over the course of the collection. For each dance, there is a triple minor version using the obvious one, but when writing a 3-couple version, I took the opportunity of introducing a different interpretation. I decided to write a 3-couple version for each of the dances, as the modern dancer appears to want to be dancing most of the time, whereas in Sancho's time, any opportunity to talk to your partner away from your chaperone would have been grasped with open arms, as balls were often the only occasion when you would be able to mix with people from outside your own household.
Meryl, it seems Green Ginger worked with other Sanchez collections as well. Our next video will be from the 2007 Cordial Club performance at Cecil Sharp House for Dance Around the World event. They performed two Sancho's dances from his 1779 collection, Mungo Delight and Duchess of Devonshire's Reel. Can you comment on this?
Yes, indeed. There are two other dance collections written by Sancho, which we've seen played and recorded dances from. The earlier work from around 1767 is titled Minuets, Cotillions and Country Dances for the Violin, Mandolin, German Flute and Harpsichord. Dedicated to Henry, Duke of Buccleuch, who was married to the daughter of Lord Montague, there is a Scottish connection, as Sancho sometimes travelled to the Duke's home Dalkeith Palace in the course of his work. Dalkeith Palace is the name of another of Sancho's dances featured in Dances for a Princess. We recorded the sword knot from this collection on our album A Midsummer Regency Romp. The two country dances shown in the following video come from the book 12 Country Dances for the year 1779, set for the harpsichord and dedicated to Miss North. The collection contains 7 reels and 5 jigs. We've played several of the dances from these collections and find them interesting. We recorded one dance, Lord Dalkeith's reel, on our album Grand Waterloo Ball. Sancho's reels often contain rights and lefts in 4 bars, which is quite a rush with one hand per bar. In both the 1779 and the Dances for a Princess collections, more than half of the country dances finish with 4-bar rights and lefts, obviously a formation Sancho was fond of. Mungo's Delight is a jig. The title refers to the character Mungo in Isaac Bickerstaff's 1769 drama, a role which Sancho is said to have played, albeit briefly. The Duchess of Devonshire's Reel is one of my favourites. You're moving all the time and everyone is included during the dance. The music is light and pretty, with runs of notes going up the scale in the middle section, while the first couple lead in a stately manner back up to the top of the set. The last 8 bars again have that 4-bar repeated phrasing, but the feel is English in style. The tune would have worked well on the harpsichord, which was the instrument for which it was intended.
Alice and Chris Rogers, who shared the recording of these dances with us, also shared some of their memories of reconstructing and performing Sancho's dances. I would like to share them with you. We got notation for half a dozen of Sancho's dances from Oliver Davies, who was archivist and keyboard tutor at the Royal College of Music, a concert pianist and a keen collector and player of the 19th century dance music, who sadly passed away this summer. We worked out 4 of the dances and performed them with Oliver and Ravenna Bass, a harp player, at the National Portrait Gallery in late 18th century costumes. Oliver had quite a sense of humor, and during the Duchess of Devonshire's Reel, he gradually speeded up until Ravenna was looking quite desperate, and we were flying for the dance with wigs wobbling and panniers bouncing. The audience caught on to what was happening, and everyone, dancers, musicians, and audience, ended up in fits of giggles. This was when they discovered that you can do fleuret very fast indeed if you keep your weight forward over your toes. We also noticed that the passes by one shoulder or another and the circles in one direction or another made this dance flow. We performed it later again at Horniman's Museum.
Like all dances we are recreating, the beauty is that we can only make an educated guess as to interpretation. If you gave a number of dance teachers a single dance to interpret, there would probably be several different versions based on their own experience of dancing. The same applies to musicians and how they play the music, at what speed and so on. We like to feel that Sancho would be pleased we're using his music and dances some 240 years after he wrote them, and he's happy that he is remembered by the dancers and musicians of today.
Sally, Meryl, and Paul for this interesting discussion. So certainly I felt I learned a lot about Sancho's dances and music. If you would like to learn more about Sancho as a dancing master, Sally's book about his 1776 collection and Valerie Webster's book about 1779 collection are available to purchase from the EDC website. Music for Sancho's dances, including the album Dances for the Princess, can be bought through the Green Ginger Band website.
Certainly, we did not cover everything about Sancho's musical and dance heritage. Our aim was to bring attention to the existence and work that has been done to uncover and bring them alive. We hope you found his dance and music enjoyable and somewhat reflective of his personality and spirit, similar to his letters. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. We will try to get back to you, and we are looking forward to interesting discussions. Also, we are hoping to bring a bigger event dedicated to Black history of early dance later in 2021. Follow Early Dance Circle social media channels or visit EDC website for updates. Thank you for watching and goodbye.